Lena was a quiet woman who lived a simple life in a small town. She wasn't someone people noticed right away. She didn't wear expensive clothes or drive fancy cars. She lived in a cozy house with flowers around her porch, and she loved spending her mornings watering them before heading to her small office. To most people, she looked like an ordinary woman with an ordinary life. But behind that simple image was a story no one really knew. Lena came from a humble background. Her parents taught her to work hard, stay honest, and help others whenever she could. When they passed away, she inherited a small family business, a local trade company that her father had built with decades of effort. Lena worked quietly and steadily, turning it into something bigger. She never showed off her success, and even though the company grew beyond anyone's expectations, she continued to live simply. She didn't see the point in showing off money. Her joy came from helping others, not from impressing people. One morning, Lena checked her mail while sipping her tea. Among the bills and letters, there was a thick white envelope with gold trimming. The handwriting was fancy and the seal looked official. Curious, she opened it. Inside was an elegant invitation card that read, "You are cordially invited to the annual City Charity Gala at the Grand Crest Hotel this Saturday evening." Lena blinked in surprise. She had never attended such events. The gala was something the city's wealthiest people hosted each year. A night of glamour, expensive dresses, fine dining, and public donations. She wondered if the invitation had been sent by mistake. Maybe it was meant for someone else who shared her name. But as she reread it, she noticed her own address printed clearly. She smiled faintly. Maybe it's fate, she thought softly. The cause mentioned on the invitation caught her attention. All proceeds were going to fund education for poor children. That was something close to her heart. She had been supporting small schools and orphanages quietly for years. Maybe attending this gala could help her understand how these big organizations worked, and maybe she could do more. The next few days, she thought about whether to go. She didn't have any fancy gowns, and she wasn't used to being around people who valued appearance so much. But in the end, her desire to support the cause outweighed her worries. "It's not about me," she told herself. "It's about the children." On the evening of the gala, Lena stood in front of her small mirror. She wore a simple light blue dress she had owned for years. It wasn't expensive, but it was neat and elegant. Her hair was tied in a clean bun, and she wore a silver bracelet her mother had given her. Looking at her reflection, she smiled softly. "This will do," she whispered. When she arrived at the Grand Crest Hotel, she immediately noticed how grand everything looked. The hall sparkled with golden lights, crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and a red carpet stretched across the entrance. Guests stepped out of shiny cars wearing glittering gowns and suits. Laughter echoed as photographers took pictures. Lena stepped out of the taxi quietly and walked toward the entrance, holding her small purse close. A few guests looked at her curiously, wondering who she was. She didn't seem to fit in with the crowd. Her dress was too simple, her shoes too plain. But she didn't care. She smiled at the staff and showed her invitation. The receptionist at the door looked at the card, then at Lena, hesitating for a moment. "Oh, welcome, ma'am," she said politely but with visible confusion. Lena nodded kindly and walked in. Inside, the hall was full of well-dressed people talking loudly, laughing, and sipping wine. Tables were decorated with roses and gold ribbons. Waiters moved gracefully, carrying trays of food. A soft melody played from a live orchestra on the stage. Lena walked to a corner and looked around quietly. She admired how beautiful everything was, not because it was expensive, but because of how much work went into making it perfect. She loved seeing people come together for charity, even if some of them did it just for attention. She reminded herself that any help, no matter the reason, still helped someone in need. A group of women nearby whispered to each other, glancing at Lena. One of them, dressed in a sparkling red gown, smirked and said, "Who invited her? She looks like she walked in from a thrift store." They giggled softly, trying not to be heard. Lena did hear them, but she pretended not to notice. Instead, she focused her eyes on the stage, where the event's host, a tall, elegant woman named Mrs. Grayson, was greeting everyone. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," the host said into the microphone. "Tonight we gather not only to celebrate success, but to share it. Your generosity helps build futures for countless children." Applause filled the hall. Lena clapped sincerely, her eyes shining. She was moved by the thought of helping others, even if the environment around her felt distant and showy. As the evening went on, Lena sat at a table near the back. The seats closer to the stage were already taken by the city's most well-known families and business owners. She didn't mind being far away. From where she sat, she could observe everything quietly. When the dinner was served, the waiters moved around quickly, filling glasses and serving dishes. Most of them walked past Lena's table at first, unsure if she belonged there. Eventually, one young waiter noticed her empty plate and hurried over. "I'm sorry, ma'am, for the delay," he said apologetically. "It's quite all right," Lena replied with a gentle smile. "You're doing a wonderful job." The young man smiled back, surprised by her kindness. He had been ignored by most guests all night. Lena's words warmed his heart. A few minutes later, a group of men at the next table began discussing donations loudly. One of them laughed and said, "I bet half of these people are here to show off. Some will pledge big amounts and never pay." Another added, "And some will pretend to donate just to get their names printed in tomorrow's paper." They all laughed. Lena listened quietly, thinking how strange it was that people could turn charity into competition. For her, giving was something private, something between her and her heart. She looked at the children's photos displayed on the big screen, small faces smiling in school uniforms, some holding books for the first time. Her eyes softened. Those smiles were the reason she was there. Just then, the host walked past her table, greeting a few guests. When she reached Lena, she paused. "Oh, hello," Mrs. Grayson said with a polite but puzzled expression. "I don't think we've met. Are you here with someone?" Lena shook her head. "No, I came alone. I received an invitation and wanted to support the cause." Mrs. Grayson smiled, though there was a trace of disbelief in her eyes. "How thoughtful," she said, before quickly moving on to greet others. Lena didn't mind. She was used to being overlooked. What mattered to her was that she was part of something that could make a difference, even if no one noticed her. The night continued with speeches, laughter, and music. People clapped for the big donors and cheered as each new name was announced. Cameras flashed and reporters scribbled notes. Lena clapped too, happy for the children who would benefit from these generous acts. She didn't speak much, didn't draw attention, and didn't try to fit in. She simply watched him and waited. She had come for one reason, and that reason had nothing to do with how others saw her. When the orchestra started playing a soft tune, Lena closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music fill her heart. It reminded her of her late mother's words. "No matter how the world treats you, stay kind. Your kindness will always return to you in ways you don't expect." As she opened her eyes, she saw Mrs. Grayson laughing with a group of donors near the stage. The atmosphere sparkled with pride and luxury. But behind all that glitter, Lena sensed something missing: sincerity. Still, she smiled to herself. She had no intention of judging anyone. Everyone gave in their own way, and she believed every bit of giving mattered. The night was far from over, and Lena had no idea what would happen next. She didn't know that soon. The same people who ignored her would look at her in disbelief. She didn't know that her quiet presence would soon silence an entire room. For now, she sat quietly at her corner table, calm and graceful, completely unaware that fate was about to turn the spotlight toward her in a way no one could have imagined. The evening at the charity gala grew livelier as more guests arrived, their laughter filling the hall. Soft music floated through the air while waiters carried trays of sparkling drinks and plates of fancy appetizers. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. Everyone except Lena, who quietly sat at her corner table, unnoticed by most of the crowd. She wasn't uncomfortable, but she could feel that she didn't belong in that room full of diamonds and pride. She had come with good intentions, but the look she received reminded her that appearances often mattered more to people than kindness. Every now and then, she caught whispers from nearby tables. A few women in shimmering gowns sat just a few feet away, sipping wine and exchanging gossip. One of them leaned toward another and said softly, "Who invited her? Look at that dress. It's so outdated." Another giggled and replied, "Maybe she's a volunteer or something. She doesn't look like someone who could afford to be here." They spoke in hushed tones, but Lena heard them clearly. She kept her eyes on her glass of water, pretending not to notice. Years of life had taught her that reacting to every unkind word only gave others power over your peace. Still, a small ache grew in her chest. She had only come to help, not to impress anyone. A few minutes later, Mrs. Grayson, the host of the event, walked to the center of the hall, tapping her glass lightly to call for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with a wide smile, "we are so grateful for your presence tonight. Every one of you has played a part in supporting this beautiful cause, giving education and hope to children who deserve a chance." Applause filled the room. Lena clapped too, feeling truly happy to see people come together for something meaningful. As Mrs. Grayson continued her speech, she began calling out the names of special guests. "We have business leaders, celebrities, and generous sponsors among us tonight. Let's make them feel welcome." The spotlight moved around the room, and everyone cheered when a well-known businessman stood up and waved. The cameras flashed. Then, when Mrs. Grayson's eyes landed on Lena's table, her tone changed slightly. "Oh, and I see we have someone new with us tonight," she said, squinting to read Lena's name tag. "Lena Hamilton?" A few heads turned toward the corner table. Lena stood up politely and smiled, giving a small nod. The host hesitated for a moment before continuing. "How wonderful. Welcome, dear. It's always nice to have new faces joining our cause." Her voice was polite, but there was a touch of curiosity, and perhaps a little doubt, hidden beneath her smile. Lena nodded again and sat down. Around her she could hear more whispers. "Never heard of her," someone murmured. "Maybe she's from some small company," another replied. "Well, she must have received the wrong invitation," a third voice joked softly. They laughed quietly, hiding their amusement behind their glasses. Lena stayed calm. She wasn't angry, only a little sad that people could judge so quickly. She remembered her mother's voice in her mind again. "Kindness isn't weakness, my dear. It's strength that most people don't understand." When dinner was served, Lena tried to enjoy her meal. The waiters moved quickly around the tables, but somehow she was always served last. The people sitting at nearby tables didn't make space for her or invite her to join their conversations. She was invisible in a room full of shining lights, but not everyone ignored her. A young volunteer named Daniel, who was helping serve food and refill glasses, noticed her gentle smile when everyone else had overlooked her. He approached quietly and asked, "Ma'am, is everything all right? Do you need anything?" Lena looked up, a bit surprised that someone had spoken kindly to her. "I'm fine, thank you," she said with a warm smile. "You're doing a wonderful job. I know this must be a long night for you." Daniel smiled back, his face lighting up. "It is, but hearing that makes it easier. Thank you." He left, but he kept glancing at her every so often, admiring how calm and kind she remained even though others seemed to treat her unfairly. Later, as the speeches ended, a group of guests gathered near Lena's table. They were laughing and showing off their jewelry, talking loudly about their luxury holidays and expensive purchases. One woman wearing a golden gown looked at Lena and said in a half-joking tone, "My dear, you're awfully quiet. Don't tell me you forgot your diamonds tonight?" Her friends burst into laughter. Lena smiled politely and replied, "I don't own any diamonds. I prefer spending on other things." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what's more important than a little sparkle?" Lena looked at her gently and said, "Education. It shines brighter than anything money can buy." There was a brief silence. The woman didn't know how to respond. She gave a stiff smile and turned away, pretending not to have heard. Her friends changed the topic quickly. Daniel, who had been nearby refilling drinks, overheard the exchange. He couldn't help but smile to himself. This woman, sitting alone in her plain dress, had more grace than everyone else combined. After dinner, the main part of the gala began, the charity auction and donation pledge. Mrs. Grayson took the microphone again and said, "Now this is the most important part of our evening, the moment where we give from our hearts." The lights dimmed slightly, and a big screen showed photos of children who had been helped by the charity in the past years. Their smiles were bright and innocent, and the crowd clapped warmly. Then, the bidding began. "We'll start the evening with a painting donated by the Anderson family," Mrs. Grayson announced. "The bidding starts at 10,000. Hands shot up around the room. The numbers climbed quickly. 15,000, 20, 30. People clapped as one of the well-known businessmen finally won the painting for 50,000. Next came jewelry, trips, and designer items. Each time the bids grew higher and the crowd cheered. Lena sat quietly watching the excitement. She admired their willingness to give, even if some of it was for show. When the donation pledges began, Mrs. Grayson encouraged everyone to write down their amounts on small cards that the volunteers handed out. Daniel approached Lena's table with a soft smile and handed her a card and pen. "Here you go, ma'am." "Thank you," she said kindly. She looked at the blank card for a moment, then began writing slowly. At that moment, one of the women from earlier noticed her. "Oh, are you donating too?" she asked in a teasing voice. "That's so sweet. Every little bit helps." Her tone was sugar-coated with mockery. The others around her giggled. Lena looked up at her with calm eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "Every little bit does help. But sometimes it's not so little." The woman chuckled. "Of course. I didn't mean it that way." She turned back to her group, whispering something that made them laugh again. Lena didn't react. She finished writing and folded her card neatly. When Daniel came to collect it, she handed it to him with a smile. "Please make sure this goes directly to the host." "I will," he said. He noticed her handwriting, neat and steady, and the number written on the card made him freeze for a second. He looked up at her, surprised, but her expression told him not to say anything. He nodded quietly and walked away. Back on stage, Mrs. Grayson began reading the donation amounts aloud to thank the guests. "Thank you to the Monroe family for $50,000. The Kingsleys for $200,000. Mr. Harvey for $500,000. How generous." The crowd clapped after each name. Then she reached the next card. Her smile paused for a moment as she read it. She blinked and then laughed softly, assuming it was a joke. "Oh my, this one says $10 million? Surely that's a typo." The audience erupted in laughter. Some clapped jokingly, others looked around, wondering who had written it. Mrs. Grayson chuckled and said into the mic, "Who wrote this one? Let's see. Lena Hamilton." The laughter grew louder. All eyes turned toward the corner table where Lena sat calmly. The same woman who had mocked her earlier put a hand over her mouth, hiding a smile. "Oh dear," Mrs. Grayson said playfully. "That's quite an ambitious number, Miss Hamilton." "Did you mean 10,000 perhaps?" Lena simply smiled and replied, "No, I meant what I wrote." The room quieted slightly. Her calmness caught everyone off guard. Mrs. Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's generous. We'll certainly check that later." She forced a laugh, trying to move on. But Daniel stood near the side of the stage, holding a small device he used to confirm payments. He cleared his throat nervously and said, "Ma'am, the transaction has already gone through. The payment is real." A murmur ran through the room. Mrs. Grayson turned toward him, confused. "What do you mean?" Daniel stepped forward and spoke clearly. "The donation has already been transferred from the Hamilton Foundation." The crowd fell silent. Everyone stared at Lena, the quiet woman in the plain blue dress, sitting peacefully while whispers rippled through the hall. Mrs. Grayson's confident smile slowly faded as realization began to dawn. The woman they had mocked might not be who they thought she was. And that night, the simple woman no one respected was about to change the atmosphere of the entire room. For a moment, the entire hall was silent. The only sound was the faint music playing in the background, slowly fading as everyone turned toward the corner table. Lena sat still, her calm eyes resting on the host, who looked frozen with surprise. The room that had been full of laughter just seconds ago now seemed to hold its breath. The host finally blinked and tried to smile again, though it looked uneasy this time. "Ah, well," she said into the microphone, forcing a light laugh. What a remarkable sense of humor. 10 million, you say? Quite the statement. Lena didn't laugh. She simply smiled kindly and replied, "It wasn't meant to be a joke." Her voice was steady, quiet, but it carried through the room clearly. There was something in her tone that made people stop whispering. The host's face stiffened. She was used to being in control, to being the center of attention, but this woman's calmness unsettled her. "Well," she said quickly, "that's a very generous amount. We'll verify it later. Thank you, Miss Hamilton." She was about to move on, but before she could, Daniel, the young volunteer, stepped forward again. His voice trembled slightly, but he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's already verified. The payment was processed before the announcement. The Hamilton Foundation has completed the transfer." The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs. "The Hamilton Foundation?" one man whispered to another. That's the same one that's been funding schools and hospitals all over the country. Yes, another replied, eyes wide. But no one knows who runs it. It's always anonymous. People began looking at Lena in disbelief. She sat quietly, her hands folded on her lap, not proud or smug, just peaceful. The host cleared her throat, her confidence slipping away. Miss Hamilton, may I ask, are you affiliated with the Hamilton Foundation? Lena nodded softly. I founded it. The entire hall seemed to freeze again. Glasses clinked softly as someone accidentally dropped a fork. Even the waiters stopped moving. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Then came the whispers, louder this time. She's the founder. All this time, she was the one behind those donations. I can't believe it. The same women who had laughed at her earlier now looked pale and speechless. The host tried to recover her composure. Well, that's unexpected. We are deeply honored to have you here tonight, Miss Hamilton, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. What a surprise for all of us. Lena gave a gentle nod. I didn't come to surprise anyone, she said softly. I only came because I believe in this cause. Her words were simple, but they carried more grace than any speech made that night. As she finished speaking, Daniel watched her from the side of the stage. There was admiration in his eyes. He had seen her being laughed at, ignored, and mocked. And now, the same crowd that had looked down on her was staring at her with awe. But Lena wasn't done teaching them what true grace meant. The host, still trying to regain control of the evening, picked up her microphone again. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Miss Hamilton a big round of applause for her incredible generosity. The room filled with applause, but it wasn't genuine at first. It was awkward and uneven, like people were clapping because they felt they had to. Some of them clapped to hide their guilt, others out of embarrassment. Lena stood up slowly, giving a polite smile to the crowd. When the applause faded, she spoke again, her voice soft but steady. I didn't plan to say anything tonight, she began, but I've realized something. When I walked in earlier, I felt many eyes on me, not because of who I am, but because of how I looked. Some of you thought I didn't belong here, and that's all right, I understand. We live in a world where people are often judged by what they wear or how much they seem to have. Her words made several guests lower their eyes. The room grew quieter. But what truly matters, Lena continued, isn't what we wear or how we look. It's what we carry inside us, compassion, respect, and sincerity. Those things are worth more than any diamond in this room. She smiled gently, looking around the hall. I've met people with very little who have given more than those with plenty. Because generosity doesn't come from wealth, it comes from the heart. Her words struck everyone deeply. Even the host, who had been trying to maintain her poise, looked visibly uncomfortable. Lena continued softly. Tonight isn't about who gives the most money. It's about remembering why we give it all and to change lives. To help children who dream of a better future. That's what we're all here for. The room was silent now. No one dared to interrupt her. Even the cameras had stopped flashing. Lena gave a small bow and sat back down. Daniel felt his chest tighten with respect. He had never seen someone so humble yet so strong. After a long pause, the host finally spoke again, her tone more humble now. Thank you, Miss Hamilton. Those were beautiful words, truly inspiring. Lena nodded politely, and the event slowly continued. But the atmosphere had completely changed. The loud laughter, the gossip, and the arrogance that had filled the air before were gone. Now, people whispered quietly, their faces thoughtful, some even ashamed. At the next table, one of the women who had laughed at Lena earlier turned to her friend and said softly, I can't believe we said those things about her. Her friend sighed, guilt filling her face. She didn't deserve it. And she didn't even make us feel bad. She just spoke kindly, like it didn't matter. Meanwhile, Daniel brought a glass of water to Lena's table. That was incredible, he said softly. You handled that with so much grace. Lena looked up at him and smiled. Thank you. But it's not about handling anything. It's just about remembering that kindness is always stronger than pride. He nodded, touched by her calmness. Most people would have been angry after what they did. She shook her head gently. Anger never teaches anyone, but silence sometimes does. A few minutes later, as the event continued, several people came to her table, one after another, to apologize or thank her for her generosity. Some were sincere, others were clearly just trying to fix their image. But Lena greeted each one with the same warm smile. She held no grudge. When Mrs. Grayson approached her again, her tone was softer this time. "Miss Hamilton, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to make light of your pledge. I truly didn't know who you were." Lena looked at her gently and replied, "That's all right. You couldn't have known. And honestly, it doesn't matter who I am. It matters that the children will receive the help they need." The host nodded, clearly humbled. "You're absolutely right. And thank you for reminding us all what this night is really about." Lena gave a kind smile. "We all need reminders sometimes." As the night went on, the atmosphere in the hall shifted completely. People began donating more, not to compete, but because they had been moved. They spoke more softly, treated the staff with respect, and for the first time that night, the event felt truly meaningful. Daniel stood by the stage, watching Lena from a distance. She didn't act like someone who had just donated $10 million. She didn't seek attention or praise. She sat quietly, speaking kindly to those who approached her, her calm smile never fading. To him, she wasn't just generous. She was graceful in a way he had never seen before. When the event finally ended, guests began leaving one by one. Many stopped to shake Lena's hand, thanking her for her generosity. A few even apologized again for their earlier behavior. She accepted their words with kindness, never once mentioning what had happened. Outside, as cars lined up to pick up guests, Daniel hurried to catch her before she left. "Miss Hamilton," he called softly. She turned and smiled. "Yes?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I just wanted to thank you. Not just for the donation, for how you carried yourself tonight." "You changed the whole room." Lena smiled warmly. "No, I didn't change anything. I just reminded people to look beyond the surface." Daniel nodded, understanding what she meant. "Still, I'll remember this night for a long time." Lena reached into her purse, took out a small envelope, and handed it to him. "Then maybe you can use this to do something good too," she said gently. He looked at the envelope, confused. "What is it?" "Just a little help for your studies," she said softly. "You have a kind heart. Don't ever lose that." Before he could thank her, she stepped into her car and disappeared into the night. Daniel opened the envelope later and found a check, enough to pay for his university tuition in full. His eyes filled with tears. That night he realized he hadn't just met a wealthy woman. He had met someone truly rich, in heart, in soul, and in humanity. And everyone who had been at that gala would never forget the lesson she taught without raising her voice. True worth never needs to be shown. It simply shines on its own. The hall was glowing with golden lights as the auction host walked back onto the stage. The guests had finished their meals and were ready for the donation round. The air was filled with laughter, chatter, and the clinking of wine glasses. People looked excited to show off their generosity, but for most of them it was about status, not kindness. Lena sat quietly at her table in the far corner. Her plate was half empty, but she wasn't hungry anyway. The words and whispers from earlier still floated in her mind. She had been laughed at, ignored, and treated as if she didn't belong there. But instead of feeling angry, she felt something else, calm. There was something peaceful about knowing the truth when everyone else was lost in pretense. The host tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. We are about to begin the most important part of this event, the charity donation segment. Remember, every dollar you give tonight goes toward building schools and supporting children in need." Applause filled the room. Everyone clapped, though many of them were already calculating how much they could give without looking cheap. The host began calling out names from the guest list. Wealthy business owners stood up one after another, announcing their donations proudly. "50,000, shouted one man in a shiny black suit. The crowd cheered. 75,000, yelled a woman wearing diamond earrings. The applause grew louder. The host kept the energy high. "Oh, this is wonderful. Let's see who else would like to make a difference tonight." Lena quietly picked up the small donation card from her table. The soft paper felt heavy in her hand, as if it carried something more than words. She thought of the children she had met through her foundation, kids who studied under broken roofs who still smiled even when they didn't have books or shoes. Those memories filled her heart with warmth. She started writing on the card slowly. Around her, laughter echoed again. At a nearby table, Mrs. Grayson, the host of the gala, noticed her. She leaned toward her friend and whispered something that made both of them giggle. Then she raised her voice just enough for others to hear. "Oh, look," she said with a mocking tone. "Even the sweet lady from table 9 wants to donate. How lovely." "Every penny helps," a few people chuckled. Some turned to glance at Lena and smiled politely, though the sarcasm was clear. Lena looked up for a moment. Her calm eyes met Mrs. Grayson's sharp, painted ones. Instead of responding, she simply smiled. A gentle, forgiving smile that said more than words ever could. Then she went back to her card, finishing her note neatly before folding it and handing it to the volunteer walking by. Daniel, the young volunteer who had been watching her all evening, took the card and smiled softly. There was something about her composure that struck him. Most people, after being treated so badly, would have stormed out, but she remained graceful. He walked up to the stage and handed the donation card to the announcer. The announcer began reading the cards aloud one by one. "Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, $100,000. "Wonderful. Thank you, Mrs. Patel, $200,000. The audience applauded after each name. The mood was bright and confident. Then suddenly the announcer paused. His eyes widened slightly as he looked at the next card in his hand. He looked toward the far corner where Lena was sitting. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said hesitantly, "we have a donation of $10 million. For a second, there was complete silence. The sound of forks, glasses, and whispers all stopped. Every head turned toward the back of the hall where Lena sat, quiet and still. Then laughter broke out. It started with one person, then spread like wildfire. 10 million? One man snorted. "That must be a joke." "She probably meant 10,000, said another, laughing loudly. Mrs. Grayson stood up, still smiling, but her tone filled with mockery. "Oh, my dear," she said. "That's a wonderful number, but maybe there's been a small mistake. 10 million is quite a lot, don't you think?" Lena stayed seated. Her hands rested gently on her lap. "There's no mistake," she said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly across the hall. "That's the correct amount." The host's smile faltered. The laughter in the room began to fade slowly, replaced by confusion. The announcer glanced toward the organizers, unsure of what to do next. One of them hurried off the stage to verify the information. A few moments later, the event coordinator returned, whispering something into the host's ear. The host's eyes widened as she looked at Lena again. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said carefully, "we've confirmed that the donation has already been transferred. From the Hamilton Foundation." The room froze. People began murmuring. "The Hamilton Foundation?" Someone whispered. "That's one of the biggest charity organizations in the country." Another person added, "But no one knows who runs it." All eyes turned toward Lena. She looked calm, almost serene, as if she had expected this moment. The host took a deep breath and asked, "Miss, are you connected to the Hamilton Foundation?" Lena smiled kindly. "Yes, I started it years ago," she replied simply. Gasps filled the hall. Mrs. Grayson's face turned pale, her hand gripping the edge of the table. The same people who had mocked her earlier now sat in stunned silence. The realization hit them all at once. The woman they had ridiculed for her simple dress was not just wealthy, but the very person whose generosity had helped countless lives. Daniel, standing near the stage, couldn't help but smile proudly. He had sensed there was something special about her, but he hadn't imagined this. Mrs. Grayson tried to recover her composure. "Oh, my goodness," she said nervously. "We're truly honored to have you here tonight." "We had no idea," Lena interrupted gently. "That's all right," she said. "I didn't come for attention. I just wanted to support the children. That's all that matters to me." The room stayed quiet. Even the air seemed to shift from arrogance to shame. The people who had looked down on her earlier now looked at their own hands, unable to meet her eyes. The host tried to lighten the moment. "Well, let's all give a huge round of applause for such incredible generosity." The audience clapped, but the sound was uneasy. Not the joyful applause from before, but one mixed with guilt and disbelief. Lena stood slowly and walked toward the stage. Her movements were calm, her expression kind. She took the microphone from the host, who looked almost relieved to hand it over. "I don't want to take too much of your time," Lena began. Her voice was soft but firm. "I just want to say something simple. Tonight isn't about who gives the most. It's about why we give. When I walked in here, I saw people dressed beautifully, speaking confidently, and I admired that. But I also noticed something else. I saw how quick we can be to judge others by what they wear or how they look. The hall was silent. Every word seemed to echo. I've seen real poverty, she continued. I've seen children with no food, yet they smile wider than anyone here. I've met women who have nothing, yet they share whatever little they have. Those people taught me that kindness isn't shown by status or fashion, it's shown by heart. A few people lowered their heads, ashamed. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, Lena added softly. I just hope we all remember that the purpose of charity is compassion, not pride. When she finished, there was a pause. Then slowly the audience began to clap, genuinely this time. It wasn't forced or polite, it was heartfelt. The sound grew until it filled the hall. Even Mrs. Grayson stood and clapped, her eyes glistening. She couldn't hide her guilt, but she also couldn't deny the respect she now felt for the woman she had insulted. Lena smiled once more, handed the microphone back, and quietly returned to her seat. Daniel approached her afterward and said quietly, "That was beautiful. You didn't just donate money. You taught everyone a lesson they'll never forget." Lena smiled at him. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than pride," she said. As the night went on, the atmosphere changed completely. People were softer, more genuine. They spoke kindly to the servers, thanked the volunteers, and avoided bragging. It was as if Lena's calm truth had washed the room clean. And though she never sought recognition, that night became one that no one would ever forget, not because of the amount she gave, but because of the grace she showed when no one believed she belonged. The hall was still buzzing with whispers long after Lena sat down. People looked at her with a mix of awe and guilt. The same faces that had turned away from her earlier were now watching her as if they were seeing her for the first time. No one spoke loudly anymore. The laughter, the gossip, the proud voices, all of it had disappeared. Lena sat quietly, sipping a glass of water. She didn't look proud or angry. She just looked peaceful, the kind of peace that comes when truth speaks for itself. Mrs. Grayson, who had been the loudest voice of mockery earlier, stood at her table, frozen. Her face had lost all color. She had been the one to make jokes about Lena's simple dress and question her presence. Now the reality of who Lena truly was made her chest tighten with shame. After a few moments, she gathered the courage to walk over. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she approached Lena's table. Everyone watched, holding their breath. When she reached Lena, her voice trembled a little. I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I was terribly wrong about you. I judged you unfairly, and I'm ashamed of how I behaved tonight." Lena looked up at her and smiled softly. "You don't need to apologize," she said. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." Mrs. Grayson hesitated, her eyes glistening. "You're far kinder than I deserve," she whispered. Lena shook her head. "Kindness is free," she said, "and it changes more than anger ever could." That one sentence seemed to touch everyone nearby. People nodded silently, realizing how right she was. After the gala ended, guests started walking up to Lena one by one. Some thanked her for the donation. Others simply apologized for how they had treated her earlier. Their words were sincere, and though she could sense their guilt, Lena didn't hold it against them. She just smiled and wished them well. Daniel, the young volunteer, approached her again. He had watched the entire scene unfold from the sidelines, still amazed at her calm strength. "I've never seen anything like that," he said softly. "You turned the whole room upside down without raising your voice once." Lena smiled faintly. "When people see you as less, sometimes silence is stronger than any argument," she said. "They expect anger. But when you stay calm, it confuses them. It makes them listen." Daniel nodded slowly. "You didn't just give money tonight. You gave everyone a lesson they'll remember." She looked at him and smiled. "I didn't mean to teach anyone," she said gently. "I only came to support a good cause." The rest just happened. They both stood quietly for a moment, watching as people gathered their coats and left the hall. The once lively chatter was now soft and thoughtful. Even the servers who had been hesitant to approach Lena earlier now smiled warmly at her as they cleared the tables. Later, as Lena prepared to leave, a few of the guests approached her again. One woman who had laughed at her earlier stopped her near the exit. "I feel terrible about what I said before," she admitted, her voice trembling. I thought you were just an ordinary woman. Lena gave her a gentle smile. I am an ordinary woman, she said. Money doesn't change that. It only changes how people look at you. The woman looked down, embarrassed. You're right, she whispered. Lena placed a hand on her shoulder. We all forget sometimes, she said kindly. Just remember, kindness doesn't cost anything. But judgment always does. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet. The soft wind brushed against the trees as the Gala lights sparkled in the distance. Lena took a deep breath and smiled to herself. It had been a strange night, hurtful in the beginning but healing in the end. As she walked toward her car, Daniel caught up with her. Are you heading home? He asked. Yes, she said. It's been a long evening. He hesitated, then said, If you don't mind me asking, why didn't you tell them who you were from the start? It would have saved you from all that humiliation. Lena paused and looked up at the night sky for a moment before replying. If I had told them, she said softly, they would have treated me differently. I wanted to see how people act when they think someone has nothing to offer them. That's when you see who they really are. Daniel nodded slowly. And what did you see tonight? She smiled faintly. I saw pride. I saw fear. But I also saw hope. Sometimes people just need a reminder that kindness should never depend on someone's clothes or status. Daniel smiled, deeply moved. You're incredible, he said. Lena shook her head. I'm not, she said simply. I just try to live by the same values my parents taught me. To give when I can, to forgive when it's hard, and to never forget where I came from. As she got into her car, Daniel stood there watching her leave. He felt like he had just witnessed something rare, a kind of quiet greatness that didn't need applause. Inside the hall, Mrs. Grayson stayed behind long after most of the guests had left. She stood near the empty tables, staring at the spot where Lena had sat. Her husband approached her quietly. Are you all right? He asked. She nodded slowly. I'm just thinking, she said. All night I was worried about looking important, and the most important person in this room was the one I tried to belittle. Her husband sighed. It happens. We get lost in our pride. Mrs. Grayson looked around the empty room. Not anymore, she said firmly. I want next year's event to be different. No more showing off. No more judging. We'll make it about the people we're helping, not ourselves. He smiled softly. That sounds like something she would say. She nodded. She made me realize what real class looks like, and it's not about the dress or the diamonds. The next morning, social media was full of stories about the gala. Pictures of Lena began circulating online. Reporters wrote about the mysterious woman who had silenced a room full of wealthy people with her $10 million donation. But the story that went viral wasn't about her money. It was about her grace. Headlines read things like, Simple woman teaches the rich a lesson in kindness, and how one act of generosity changed a whole room. People all over the city talked about her speech. Schools and community groups shared her words online. The Hamilton Foundation, which had always worked quietly, began receiving more support than ever before. Donations poured in from people who said they were inspired by her humility. When Lena saw the news, she didn't feel proud. She felt thankful, not because her name was spreading, but because the cause was finally getting attention. A few days later, Mrs. Grayson called her. She sounded nervous but sincere. I wanted to thank you again, she said, and also apologize properly. I was foolish and I learned something I'll never forget. I hope you'll give me a chance to make things right. Lena's voice was calm and gentle. You already have, she said. You realized it yourself, that's what matters. Mrs. Grayson paused. Still, I'd like to help your foundation. Maybe we can work together for the next charity event. Lena thought for a moment and then agreed. That would be wonderful, she said. Let's make sure it's truly about helping people this time. When the call ended, Lena felt a quiet joy. Not the joy of winning or being praised, but the kind that comes when something broken starts to heal. Later that week, she visited one of the schools her foundation had built. The children ran to her, laughing and holding her hands. Their faces were full of light. As she walked through the small classrooms, she felt tears fill her eyes. This, not the gala, not the attention, was what mattered. A little girl handed her a handmade card that said, "Thank you for believing in us." Lena knelt down and hugged her gently. No, she whispered. Thank you for reminding me why I do this. Outside, Daniel waited by the car, smiling as he watched her with the children. When she finally came out, he said quietly, "You really changed a lot of hearts that night." Lena smiled and looked out toward the horizon. "Maybe," she said, "but the truth is they changed mine too. I was reminded that even when people act cruel, there's always a chance they can still learn." As they drove away, the sound of the children's laughter followed them, soft and pure. The world outside was noisy and full of pride, but in that moment, Lena felt only peace, the kind that comes when you choose kindness, even when it's the hardest thing to do. Days passed after the gala, but the story didn't fade. What had started as a quiet night of mockery had turned into something far bigger. News channels covered it. People talked about it online, and everywhere she went, Lena could feel how much it had touched hearts. But for her, life went on the same way. She still woke up early, brewed her tea, and took long walks in the park before heading to the small office where her foundation operated. There were no fancy buildings or grand signs, just a few rooms filled with hardworking people who wanted to help others. When she walked in, her team greeted her with smiles. "You're famous now," one of them joked gently. "Everyone's talking about what happened at the gala." Lena laughed softly. "Fame doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is that people are finally noticing the cause." And that was true. Donations had tripled in just a few days. People who had never cared about charity before were now offering help, volunteering, and sending money to support the schools her foundation built. It was as if her calm courage had woken something inside them, a sense of humanity that had been asleep. Later that morning, Daniel came into her office carrying a stack of letters. "These came for you," he said. "Some are thank you notes. Some are from people who want to work with us." Lena looked at the pile. "That's a lot of paper," she said with a smile. He chuckled. "You've inspired half the city, you know." She picked up one of the letters and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman who had attended the gala. It said, "I was one of the people who laughed at you that night. I'm sorry. You made me see how ugly pride can be. Thank you for teaching me what real grace looks like." Lena read it silently for a few seconds. Then she placed it gently on the desk and said, "If one person changes because of what happened, then it was worth it." Daniel nodded. "You've changed more than one person," he said. "You've changed an entire community." Over the next few weeks, the foundation expanded its work. New schools were built in small villages. Children who had been studying under broken roofs now had proper classrooms and books. Lena visited many of these places, sitting with the children, reading with them, and listening to their dreams. She never went there as someone rich or powerful. She went as someone who cared. Everywhere she went, people welcomed her with open hearts. Parents thanked her, children hugged her, and teachers cried tears of gratitude. It was pure happiness, not loud or grand, but the kind that fills the soul. One afternoon, while visiting a newly opened school, Lena was invited to speak to the children. They gathered in a small hall decorated with paper flowers and handmade banners. The children clapped and cheered as she stood in front of them. She looked at their bright faces and began speaking softly. "I want you to remember something," she said. "No matter where you come from, no matter what people say about you, never stop believing that you are worth something. The world will try to measure you by what you wear or how much you have. Don't let them. Kindness, honesty, and hard work, and that's what truly matters." The children nodded, their eyes shining with admiration. Some of the teachers recorded her words, and soon, clips of her speech began spreading online. People everywhere shared it with the caption, "The woman who silenced the rich teaches children about real value." Lena didn't care for the attention. She wasn't chasing fame. She only wanted her message to reach as many hearts as possible. One evening, she received a call from Mrs. Grayson, the host of the gala. Her voice was calm and respectful this time. "I wanted to tell you," she said, "we've decided to hold another charity event next month. This time I'd like you to be our guest of honor, and I promise it will truly be about the cause." Lena smiled gently. "That's very kind of you," she replied. "But you don't need to honor me. Just make sure the help reaches those who need it most." Mrs. Grayson paused, her tone full of emotion. "It will. You've changed how I see things. I want this to be different, honest, and meaningful." When the second gala finally happened, it was nothing like the first one. Gone were the expensive decorations and flashy displays. Instead, the event was simple, warm, and filled with sincerity. Instead of fancy meals, they showed photos of the children the foundation had helped. The guests listened quietly, many wiping away tears. Lena sat in the audience this time, not on stage. She didn't need the spotlight. Seeing everyone come together for something pure was enough for her. When the event ended, Mrs. Grayson came up to her and said, "You've given me more than a lesson. You've given me peace." "Thank you." Lena smiled softly. "Peace is the best gift to give," she said. Months passed and the world slowly moved on to new stories. But the impact of that night never faded. People still spoke about the simple woman who had changed everything without anger or pride. Her foundation continued to grow. With Daniel's help, they opened more schools and even started small health centers in poor areas. Each place carried the same message, that kindness and dignity could build a better world. Sometimes, when Lena sat by her office window late at night, she thought back to that first gala. She remembered how small and out of place she had felt, sitting in that big hall full of judgmental faces. But then she smiled, realizing how far that one night had reached. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about showing that humility could be stronger than arrogance, that quiet hearts could change the loudest rooms. One rainy afternoon, Daniel came into her office holding a small framed photograph. "Look," he said. "One of the kids from our first school sent this." Lena looked at the photo. It showed a group of children standing proudly in front of their classroom, holding a banner that read, "Thank you for believing in us." Her eyes softened. "They're the real reason for everything," she said quietly. Daniel smiled. "You've made more difference than you know." She looked at him and said, "No, we all did. Every person who changed after that night, every donor, every teacher, they're part of this." He nodded. "Still, it started with you." Lena smiled, her gaze turning toward the window where the rain was gently tapping. "Sometimes," she said softly, "a storm is needed to wash away pride so the world can see clearly again." As the years went by, Lena continued her work quietly. She never sought recognition, even though people still admired her. She became a symbol of humility, a reminder that true wealth is not counted in money but in compassion. Every year on the anniversary of that gala, the charity held a small event in her honor. But Lena always refused to sit at the front. She preferred to blend into the crowd, listening, smiling, and feeling grateful that something beautiful had grown out of one painful night. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Lena walked through one of the schools she had helped build. The walls were covered with drawings made by the children, pictures of homes, families, trees, and hearts. She stopped by a painting of a woman giving a book to a child. Under it, a small hand had written, "A kind heart is more beautiful than gold." Lena smiled and touched the drawing gently. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of fulfillment. As she walked out of the schoolyard, she heard laughter and the sound of children running. The air was cool, the sky painted with soft shades of orange and pink. She stood there for a moment, breathing it all in, feeling thankful. In that quiet moment, she realized that the humiliation she had faced that night had been a blessing in disguise. It had opened doors, changed lives, and reminded her and the world that goodness never needs a spotlight. She whispered to herself, "Everything happens for a reason, even the pain." Then she smiled, looked up at the sky, and walked away slowly, her heart light, her purpose clear, and her story forever written in the hearts she had touched.